Unit 6, Day 3 homework tutorial. Your assignment is to set up the odd problems only. However, on the evens, you have to set them up and solve. But during this tutorial, I will set up the odds as well as solve them just to show you that you're on the right track. But again, all you have to do is set them up. You don't have to solve them. Because again, the biggest percentage on this upcoming test is can you set up the correct proportions? So on number 1, I would draw 2 separate triangles if I were you. Unless you can visualize it without having to draw 2 separate triangles, which some can. But for those who cannot, you have the triangle on top, and then you have the much larger, major triangle. So the triangle on top has 2 sides labeled. The bottom is 4 and 5 is on the side. On the larger triangle, the bottom is 7. On the side that on the other side, it's broken into 2 parts, 5 and x. So you would have to combine those 2 parts. Combine means to add. So you get 5 plus x or x plus 5. So now you should be able to identify the similar or corresponding sides. So we know that 4 corresponds to 7 because they're both on the bottom. And then 5 corresponds to x plus 5 because they're both on the side. So one proportion you could use in this one would be 5 is to x plus 5 as 4 is to 7. Or you could say 5 is to 4 as x plus 5 is to 7. Those are your only options. Pick your favorite and write it down. But as I mentioned, I'll continue to solve it just to, if you were curious, if you were getting it right, but you don't have to do this part. So I'll cross multiply. I would first multiply 4 with x, get 4x, plus 4 times 5, which is 20. Then multiply 5 with 7, and I get 35. Then I would subtract 20 on both sides, which would leave me with 4x is equal to 15. Divide by 4 on both sides, which would give me x is equal to something 0.25 or 0.75. 3.75. I'm pretty sure, but let's double check. Why is the calculator? There we go. Not moving. All right. 15 divided by 4. Yes, because I knew. I knew. Anywho, on number 3, same idea. You could separate the triangles, but I'm going to leave them intact because you should be able to see that it's very, very similar to number 1. It's just rotated differently. So when I set up my proportion, I could use x is to x plus 2 as 5 is to 9. Or I could say x is to 5 as x plus 2 is to 9. Those are your options on this one. Again, I was able to do this one a lot faster because, again, it's just like number one. It's just they turn the triangle sideways. Again, this is just to be extra practice for you. So let's solve by cross multiplication. The first one I could do is 9 times x, so 9x is equal to 5 times x, which is 5x, plus 5 times 2, which is 10. Then I would subtract 5x on both sides, so that's 4x equals 10. And then divide by 4 on both sides. So you would have x is equal to 2.5. I'm pretty sure about that one. Pretty sure. Good deal. All right, number 5. Now we get a little, it looks a little different. But the only slight difference is they tell us the whole side already is x. We don't have to take that extra part and add it with the 5. So that makes setting it up even easier, to be honest. So I could say 5 is to x as 4 is to 7, or 5 is to 4 as x is to 7. So again, with practice, you should get as fast as me. It's not because I have a math degree, ladies and gentlemen. I've just been practicing like you should be on a more regular basis. That's all. That's the only difference between me and you. I've practiced a little more. But you can get here as well. So 4 times x is 4x. It is equal to 5 times 7, which is 35. Now divide both sides by 4, and x would equal, so 4 goes into 32 8 times, and that's 3 away, so 8.75. Look at that mental math skills. Mental math skills. Okay. Number 7, just like number 5. So our options are x is to 8 as 5 is to 9, or x is to 5 as 8 is to 9. While I'm here, I just had a moment that I think I should introduce you to, where I could also find this piece here, and the way I would find it is I know that the whole side is 8, right? So to find what is missing, I would take 8 minus x. So it is possible to write 8 minus x here and to use that to set up a proportion. But it would just make the proportion much more complex than it needs to be. So we're not going to use it. But I just wanted to introduce you to that possibility should you ever see it. Because we've seen it when we add x a couple of times. But rarely have I shown you when we've subtracted x. So this was a good teachable moment right here. I just wanted to make you aware of that. If you saw something like that, don't be nervous because, again, you might see it again soon. That's a big hint, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so if I cross multiply my proportion, I would have 9 times x, so 9x. and 5 times 8, which is 40. Divide both sides by 9. I know 9 goes into 36 four times, but I'm not 100% sure on the decimal form of the rest. So let's grab our calculator. So it's 4.4 repeats. So approximately 4.4. Number 9. Now, in number 9, it gives us the four outer parts that are proportional. So in this one, we don't have to separate the triangles. We could just simply say 4 is to 7 as 3 is to x, or we could say 4 is to 3 as 7 is to x. If you did want to separate because you like separating, which is totally fine, just again a teachable moment, you would have to combine these two parts. So when I combine 3 with x, I would have x plus 3. And when I combine these two parts, I would have 7 plus 4, which is 11. So it's it's still okay to separate if you want to. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Just make sure when you separate, you separate properly. And the proper way to separate would to take both of these two parts, add them together on both sides. Okay? So let's solve the cross product. So 4 times x is 4x. 7 times 3 is 21. And now we need to divide by 4. So x is equal to 5.25. Number 11, again, we're given the four outer parts. Part, 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 part. So we don't need to separate. Simply, you could take 9 is to 4 as 5.5 is to x, or you could take 9 is to 5.5 as 4 is to x. Those are your options. If you don't understand why I set up the way I do and don't separate, I'll highlight the proportional parts for you. It's a little bit harder to notice with this. So let's say the top will be yellow, and then the bottom is going to be blue. So here's my blues. And then here's my yellows. So again, when you're writing your proportions, you want the same positioning type proportional parts to be located in the same spot. So in other words, on the left proportion, the two blues are at the top, which is totally fine. And I put the two yellows at the bottom. Again, that's fine. So I positioned them in the same place when I wrote my fractions, my ratios. The other way to do it, which is a little bit, it gets a little bit more tricky, so I don't recommend it. But that's when you take the same colors and put them on top of each other. I don't recommend doing it that way because it gets a little confusing as to which one goes on top versus which one goes on bottom because they're already the same color, if that makes sense. So just be very careful. So when it comes to these and you color if you want to use highlighters to color coordinate, which is perfectly fine, I would too, I would go with option one, the proportion. So that way there's no room for error or any trickiness, if that makes sense. So now let's cross multiply. 9 times x is 9x. 4 times 5.5 is next, and we're going to need our handy dandy calculator on that one. 22. So 9x equals 22. Divide both sides by 9 now. We'll have 2.44. So in other words, x is equal to about 2.4. All right, number 13 is a lot like uh, no, number 13 is not like the others at all. It's different, period. So here's where you're going to need to separate your triangles for sure. So I have my top triangle and my bottom one, or the entire triangle, the main one. So on the top triangle, I have this side at the bottom labeled already. On the main triangle, I have the bottom piece, and then I have the right side, which is X, clearly marked. Now, remember that teachable moment I had briefly a while back? They give us this part that's 3, and then they give us the entire piece. So we need this part of our smaller top triangle in order to have our correct side labeled to set up our proportion. Since they give us the entire side, we know we would need to take that entire length, which is x, and subtract the part they give us, which is 3, to find what is missing. So that little piece is x minus 3. So now I have all my corresponding parts. 4 is to 9 as x minus 3 is to x. So now I can set up my proportions as follows. X minus 3 is to x as 4 is to 9, or x minus 3 is to 4 as x is to 9. I'm glad this question was on here. It did change the game real quickly, unfortunately. So let's cross multiply. I would start with this one. 4 times x, so 4x is equal to 9 times x, which is 9x, minus 9 times 3, which is 27. On this situation, I don't normally like to take the larger number and subtract, but it works best in this situation. So let's subtract 9x from both sides. When you do that, you would get negative 5x equals negative 27. Yeah, I don't like my x's to be negative. It just it makes problems for most people. But we can get it done. Now I need to divide both sides by -5. So make sure you divide carefully. People don't usually divide by negatives. That's why I don't like to have a negative x, but it don't worry about it. We'll be all right. So I have -27 divided by -5, which is a positive 5.4. So x is 5.4. And number 15. On this one, it gives us two of the four parts. We can find the top rightmost part by taking 9.5 minus 5 and getting 4.5. So this piece is 4.5. And then similar to the one we just did, this one would be x minus 4. So now that we have all four outer parts, we can set up our proportion as follows. We could say 5 is to 4 as 4.5 is to x minus 4, or 5 is to 4.5 as 4 is to x minus 4. So now cross multiply. 5 times x is 5x minus 5 times 4, which is 20, equal to 4 times 4.5, which is 18. I would first add 20 to both sides, so 5x is equal to 38, and then divide both sides by 5. So 38 divided by 5, 7.6. So x equals 7.6. Well, this concludes your tutorial. I hope it helps you to finish the rest of the assignment. Good luck.